And it's looking like, I guess, the first topic for us to get into, the NBA expansion, maybe coming. Wait, maybe, I don't
We'll
know. I'm not
see.
sure how to take this. There were some rumblings, some rumors that, yeah, the NBA was like on the verge of announcing expansion, and then that kind of got walked back a little bit. But the two teams were the teams that we've been talking about for months now, or the two cities were the cities we've been talking about for months now: Seattle and Las Vegas potentially getting expansion teams. So how should we take this? Is this just inevitable at this point, and this was maybe something getting out a little too early, or how do you feel about the reporting?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a chance it just came out a little early, and the NBA is not ready to do this yet, and nor are their partners in Seattle and Las Vegas ready for this to come out. What had happened was a writer for the AP tweeted a few days back. He tweeted that the NBA is going to announce expansion while playing preseason games in Seattle. They're going to announce expansion to Seattle and Las Vegas, and it was, of course, right, it took on a life of its own from there because everybody's excited and folks from those markets. It is funny though. I think the folks in Seattle were a little more like, yeah, sure, we'll believe it when we see it.
Right.
Right. That's one where I don't trust people if they're like, if Woj didn't tweet it, I'm not gonna believe it. Right. But it's yeah, it's here's where I'm at on this. I don't know that we're imminent on announcing expansion. It's certainly, there were a bunch of people like, imagine if one of these teams ends up with Victor Wembanyama. It wouldn't be next season anyway. It would
Right.
be the minimum of probably 2 years away if they announced it, this year. But where I'm at with this is, I think it's inevitable it will be Seattle and Las Vegas. I just think we're still probably another year or two out from getting the actual announcement that it's coming, which means we're somewhere between, let's say, 3 and 5 years from teams actually starting to play.
Yeah, there's going to be preseason games in Las Vegas again this year.
Mm-hmm.
The summer league is obviously hosted there. It makes it a very natural and easy city because the NBA already has a good relationship there. And of course, Seattle, the sentiment has been ever since the Sonics left. The sentiment has been, was that the theme from The Office?
It was. That's my ringtone.
That's fantastic. And I'm proud of myself for getting that off of like the
Well
first
done. Yeah,
two
it
notes.
was like name that tune. I can name
Right.
that tune too.
I got it. But the sentiment has been that Seattle was, unjustly lost their team.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that these are the two cities. And it feels like that's the path we're ultimately going to head down. Maybe the gun was just jumped a little bit in terms of saying it's coming like this summer. But again, I do think it happens eventually. And I do wonder what the new TV deal, like, does that need to be in place first before they would go down that path?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of T's that need crossed and I's that need dotted because as it stands under the current collective bargaining agreement, which we know is really only going to be good through the middle of December, both sides are very much expected to opt out. That's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean we're going to see stoppage of play and missed games or anything. It just means they're going to opt out and say, hey, let's work on a new agreement. But there's none of the revenue from expansion goes to the players in that. So these billions of dollars that are going to be paid for these expansion fees, none of that goes to the players. It all just goes to the NBA owners. The other, in this case, would be 30 owners. Would split those expansion fees up evenly. And so I think there's going to be some negotiation around either, hey, we want a chunk of that, or what we want is you have to do 12 guaranteed contracts per team or something like that. In there. There'll clearly have to be negotiation done around setting, which is more on the ownership side than it is anything with the players. But all right, if past practice is any guide, which it generally is, they'll operate under a reduced salary cap for the first couple years. If everybody else is at 130 million, they may be at 110 million, or something like that. Their draft picks were generally the first draft, sometimes the first two drafts are capped at no higher than fourth or fifth or something like that. So I do think that there is a chance what we're going to see here over the next little bit is just that the negotiations of how do we do this? How do we split this up? What does it look like? That work all needs done. That's why I don't necessarily think we're going to see this. And to your point, that TV money needs to be split because if I'm a current owner, I don't know that I want to split that pie two more ways. I would like to kind of, yeah, you can get a chunk of it, but you get, maybe, a fifth share or something in the first couple of seasons. They'll figure all that out. But I still tend to believe it's coming sooner rather than later.
I can't wait for when that does happen. We're going to have so much to talk about in terms of who gets protected. Should some teams try to offer something for players to get selected by the expansion teams, and all kinds of different stuff for us to break down in terms of strategy and how these teams can be set up. I think it will happen eventually, but maybe a little bit premature to say that it's getting done at this point. But again, it just feels like it's going to be Seattle and Las Vegas. I've seen people make arguments for other cities as well. I've seen Vancouver and stuff like that. But
and Louisville's always thrown in there too. I just think the NBA wants to rebalance, get a couple more West teams in there. We know Seattle's going to be one of them. That's just basically a guarantee. And then I think in Las Vegas, my guess is the NBA is very conscious of, they already have somewhat of a foothold in Vegas because of the summer league. But the Golden Knights are very popular, the hockey team, because that was Vegas's first pro, team in the Big Four. Now you've got the Raiders, and there's all these rumors that the A's are going to move out there. You don't really want to be the fourth league in town, right? You want to come back. Now, I've heard some people say, well, aren't they going to be the fourth team in Seattle? But the Sonics still have a fan base. There's still a group of people who love them. Basketball is extremely popular in Seattle. A ton of NBA players, as we see, constantly showing love to their home town there. So, I think that one's probably a little more straightforward. So but at this point, I would, I don't even know if you could bet this, but I would guess if you could bet it, it would be very, very heavily favored Seattle and Las Vegas as the two destinations, with everybody else, trailing far, far behind.
I don't know if you can either, but in general, I feel like for most things, if the question is, can you bet it? The answer is yes, typically.
Yeah, I mean, so his name might be Bruno on the side of the street corner taking your money in the bet.
It could be.
And he might break your legs if you don't pay. But you can generally bet on anything anywhere.
But you know what, Keith? You should have said that because we don't talk about him.
That's it. We don't talk about it.